They say the witch trials were fueled by ignorance, but what if the opposite is true? What if the most terrifying tortures ever devised were not the work of angry mobs but of educated men in robes, not superstition, but science, not chaos, but control? Beneath the paintings of Da Vinci and the lectures of Galileo, another Renaissance was unfolding, one not of art but of agony, and the people it destroyed weren't witches. They were warnings. This is the story of how intelligence became cruelty and how torture became law. The Renaissance is remembered for its brilliance, but while sculptors carved marble into gods, lawyers and priests carved human pain into procedure. They were not crude executioners. They were architects, and their blueprints were not cathedrals, they were confessions. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, courts across Europe codified the destruction of human beings under the guise of justice. The manuals were detailed. The procedures were tested. The men who signed them wore crosses and university rings, and their weapon of choice was not the sword, it was the written word. The Malleus Maleficarum, published in 1487, became the most influential book of its kind. It did not simply accuse witches, it taught governments how to break them. Its pages described how to recognize the signs, extract a confession, and legally justify the punishment. Inquisitors were instructed to use psychological torment first, solitary confinement, starvation, the illusion of mercy. If the accused did not yield, physical techniques followed, but each step was designed to look like law. That was the genius and the horror of it. Torture was not a last resort. It was policy, and those who administered it were not shamed. They were promoted. Witch trials became a spectacle of legitimacy. Trials took place in grand halls. Testimonies were recorded by scribes. Priests stood by to deliver blessings. The accused, often elderly women or socially inconvenient figures, were called forward, questioned, and offered a choice: confess and be punished, or deny and be destroyed. Some chose silence, some tried reason, but reason had no place in a process engineered for obedience. Torture was not a flaw in the system. It was the system. In Nuremberg, Bamberg, Trier, thousands were dragged into dungeons where their screams echoed through vaulted chambers, designed not just for acoustics, but for effect. Architects of the era knew how to make sound carry, and they used it. The terror was not just physical, it was auditory, visual, spiritual. The witch hunts were not mindless, they were mind control. And those who designed them understood one truth better than anyone else, that to dominate a population, you don't need truth, you just need fear engineered with precision. The iron chair did not belong to the Dark Ages. It was not forged in superstition, nor built by crude blacksmiths in smoke-choked villages. It was engineered, designed by scholars who understood human anatomy, thermal conductivity, and psychological collapse. It belonged to the Renaissance, to a world that had discovered geometry, medical textbooks, and the science of pain. In cities like Bamberg and Würzburg, these chairs were placed at the center of interrogation chambers beneath churches and palaces. They were not hidden, they were institutional. Iron spikes covered the seat, the back, the armrests, and the footplate. Each one positioned not to kill, but to pierce just deep enough, just painful enough to force compliance without granting release. But that was only the beginning. Beneath the chair, brick compartments allowed controlled fires to be lit. Slowly, quietly. The heat would rise from below, causing the metal to swell, the spikes to burn, and the flesh of the accused to blister and cook from beneath. The pain was constant, but never fast. That was the design. Slow agony, always just short of fatal. Victims would scream, faint, awaken, and scream again until confession was the only way forward. And every confession made the machine more efficient. The process was ritualized. The accused would be stripped, bound, and read their charges. A priest stood nearby, not to offer comfort, but to lend divine legitimacy. The message was clear. God had ordained this. The pain was not punishment, it was purification. By confessing, the accused could not only escape death, but prove they were not yet completely damned. It was theological torture disguised as salvation. Anna Göldi, often called the last witch of Europe, endured this, but she was not alone. Tens of thousands, mostly women, were subjected to the same apparatus, each recorded by meticulous scribes who detailed the duration of each session, the condition of the victim, and the specific moment they broke. These records were not hidden, they were shared. Across Germany, France, Switzerland, and Italy, torture centers communicated regularly, sending letters, diagrams, even updated blueprints of improved chairs. Some added locking arm clamps to restrict movement. Others included urine drainage holes beneath the seat to extend interrogation without interruption. The equipment evolved. So did the language. Pain became procedure. Terror became protocol. And those who operated the chairs began to view their work as a profession. Not executioners, but facilitators of truth. The iron chair was not about finding witches. It was about extracting obedience. It was about reminding everyone accused or not that the state did not need evidence. It only needed tools. And the most powerful tool of all was the one that looked legitimate, that sounded holy, and that turned science into suffering with a smile. The chair was not hidden in darkness. It sat under candlelight, and its warmth came not from hell but from calculated fire. The swimming test was not designed to find witches. It was designed to eliminate them cleanly, publicly, and without consequence. On the surface, it looked like divine judgment, but beneath the surface, it was engineering, a calculated death sentence dressed in ritual. The accused was bound thumb to toe and lowered into water in front of a watching crowd. The logic was circular. If they floated, it meant the water rejected them. Proof of guilt. If they sank, it meant innocence, but often too late for rescue. Either way, they lost. This was not superstition. This was mathematics with a no-win outcome. Matthew Hopkins knew that. England's self-proclaimed witch-finder general turned the swimming test into both theater and business. During the chaos of the English Civil War, he offered his services to panicked communities looking for answers. He charged per witch identified, per test conducted, per confession extracted, and he delivered. In just 3 years, over 300 people were executed under his guidance. The majority were women, widows, herbalists, midwives, or simply inconvenient. Hopkins's methods were documented and shared. His book, The Discovery of Witches, became a blueprint for monetized persecution. It included tips on where to hold drownings for best visibility, how to bind limbs to prevent accidental survival, and how to collect fees without attracting legal backlash. Torture became policy, policy became profit. Elizabeth Clark was the first to die this way under Hopkins. A one-legged widow accused of keeping demonic familiars, cats, birds, and toads that villagers claimed whispered secrets to her in the night. She was brought to the edge of the town pond, her stump wrapped in wet cloth, her wrists and ankles bound. She was dropped into the water as children stood barefoot at the shore and watched. Her body sank, her lungs filled, and still the crowd waited just in case. When she was finally pulled up, lifeless, she was declared innocent. Her property was not. Swimming tests weren't just torture, they were spectacle. Choreographed performances meant to imprint fear onto communities. The accused were paraded through town, brought to ponds, rivers, or mills. Executions were scheduled during market days to ensure high attendance. Bells rang, sermons were preached, officials blessed the water, and each drowning served a purpose far beyond the accused. It reminded the crowd that any defiance, any deviation, could bring them to the same edge. Hopkins's strategy spread through Protestant Europe and colonial America. Communities began building permanent witch ponds. Legal language was updated to allow these tests as admissible evidence. This wasn't about belief, it was about control. The swimming test gave authorities a clean way to erase dissidents while claiming divine neutrality. No blood, no blades, just water, just silence, and a body sinking beneath the weight of a justice system that never intended to save them. She was not burned, she was not drowned, she was silenced, and that was the point. For women like Agnes Sampson, torture was not just about extracting a confession, it was about erasing a voice. A midwife from Scotland, Agnes was respected, skilled, and trusted by the women in her village. But during the North Berwick witch trials of the 1590s, her knowledge became a threat. She healed without the church. She spoke with authority. And in a world ruled by men who feared the power of women's words, that was enough to be labeled a witch. Her punishment was not fire, it was iron, the Scold's bridle. This device was a masterpiece of cruelty. An iron framework fitted over the head, clamped tight behind the skull, and fixed with a spiked plate that rested directly on the tongue. Every time the victim tried to speak, the spike would drive into flesh, drawing blood, tearing muscle, silencing rebellion. Some models included bells that rang with every movement, turning the woman into a walking warning. Others had inscriptions, verses, or slurs to humiliate her further. The pain was constant, the shame louder. But the real weapon was not the metal, it was the message. Women who speak will suffer. Agnes was paraded through Edinburgh's market square, past churches, homes, and children. Her hands were bound, her gown stained, her face swollen from earlier beatings. But it was the bridle that turned her into a spectacle. People gathered to stare. Not all of them believed she was guilty. But belief didn't matter. Silence did. Her punishment wasn't just for her. It was for the midwives who watched, for the herbalists, for the mothers, daughters, and sisters who understood that their voices could be ripped from them at any moment. The bridle made that fear real. King James VI of Scotland personally endorsed these tortures. In his treatise, Daemonology, he described women like Agnes as conduits of demonic knowledge, corrupted minds that must be tamed through pain. He called the silence necessary, his courts called it just, and the blacksmiths who crafted the bridles called it business. These devices became so common that towns kept them stored like tools. Some were engraved with the names of previous wearers. Others were modified for longer use, with feeding slots or drainage holes for spit and blood. The intent was not quick punishment, it was prolonged humiliation. Women died from infection, from dehydration, from despair. But often, they didn't die immediately. They walked, they bled, they cried quietly. Because that was the design. The Scold's bridle did not kill the body, it killed the authority. And when it was removed, if it was removed, the silence often stayed. Because the real torture was not in the iron. It was in the knowledge that any woman who dared to speak might wear it next. The rack did not scream, the victims did, but the silence of the machine was part of its terror. 2 wooden rollers, a flat frame. A system of ropes and pulleys designed not for chaos but for control. It was the most surgical instrument of pain the Renaissance ever produced. And it was used not just to tear bodies apart, but to dismantle minds, stretch by stretch, thought by thought. In the chambers of the Spanish Inquisition and the dungeons of German bishoprics, it became the stage for one of the most precise tortures in recorded history, crafted by physicians, supervised by clergy, and justified by law. The accused would be bound at the wrists and ankles, stretched across the frame with care. This was not brute force, it was science. Doctors were often present. They took notes, monitored pulse, ensured consciousness. The goal was not death, it was obedience. Slowly, the rollers would turn, ligaments would snap, joints would dislocate, shoulders would separate, hips would tear, and still, the mind would remain awake, forced to witness the body become something unrecognizable. If confession didn't come, the process paused. Muscles swelled, bones shifted, then it resumed. But the pain wasn't the only weapon. It was the pause between turns. The waiting, the knowing that the next rotation would be worse, and that it would not stop until you said the words they wanted to hear. This was the fate that hovered over Galileo in the year 1633. He was never stretched, but the rack stood in the room, and he was shown it, described it, told how it worked. The threat was enough. A man who had unlocked the heavens was forced to betray them, forced to deny the earth moved around the sun, not because he was wrong, but because he had seen what happened to those who resisted. That was the genius of the rack. It did not need to be used on everyone, it only needed to exist. Torture manuals from the period described in cold detail how far a human body could be pulled before organs ruptured. They used terms like maximum compliance threshold and ligamental integrity. They treated pain like a formula. Rack designs were modified across regions. The Italian models added heated rollers. The German ones included iron spikes embedded in the frame. Each adjustment was tested and refined. Victims were data, their screams, feedback. The rack was more than wood and rope. It was a philosophy. That truth could be broken, that minds could be rewritten through bone, and that the only thing more powerful than knowledge was fear. Some who confessed never stopped believing what they knew, but their words changed. And in court, words were all that mattered. In the end, the rack did not just twist bodies, it bent reality. It turned science into heresy and pain into proof. And the people who built it called themselves civilized. They didn't just burn witches, they choreographed their deaths. In Geneva, May of the year 1545, 34 people were executed in a single day, not with haste, but with theater. These were not chaotic mobs, lighting torches in a frenzy. These were religious elites, legal authorities, and engineers working together to create what they called purification, but what was, in truth, state-sponsored terror. The executions were staged in custom-built arenas, designed with the same care used to build cathedrals, stone amphitheaters, tiered seating, controlled airflow, acoustic engineering to carry the screams. Every detail mattered. This was torture as message. This was control through spectacle. At the center of these performances stood the pyres. They were not crude piles of wood. They were layered with intention. Green wood beneath dry kindling, designed to burn long, slow, and unevenly. Flames would lick at the legs first, creeping slowly upward while keeping the chest untouched. Victims did not die instantly. They screamed, suffocated, sometimes sang hymns until their throats gave out or their minds broke. Some pyres were built with trapdoors that dropped victims into coals mid-burning, extending their agony and maximizing the visual effect. All of it was calculated. All of it was timed. These were not executions. They were warnings. John Calvin, the reformer often remembered for his theology, oversaw these events personally. He wrote sermons to accompany the burnings. He spoke of sin, purification, divine justice. His words echoed over the flames, legitimizing the violence and sanctifying the smoke. The crowd, often 10,000 strong, watched in silence or in prayer. Some wept, some cheered, most just remembered, because that was the point, to be remembered. The accused were rarely proven guilty of anything beyond being inconvenient. A widow with land, a merchant with unpopular views, a woman with healing herbs and no husband. Charges ranged from consorting with demons to causing plague by unnatural means. Their deaths served no judicial purpose. They served a political one. Every execution cleared property, eliminated dissent, and reinforced the message that power could be righteous, brutal, and eternal all at once. The economic machine behind these spectacles was as cold as the fire was hot. Families of the accused were billed for the wood, the rope, the labor. Their homes were seized. Their wealth absorbed, the church profited, the city profited. Even the builders of the pyres were paid from the estates of the condemned. And when it was over, the ashes were swept away, the next name prepared. This wasn't justice gone wrong. It was justice redesigned to terrify. And the memory of those fires did not stay in Geneva. They spread through letters, court records, and sermons replicated across Europe and beyond. Because nothing silences a population faster than the knowledge that their pain can be turned into theater, and nothing burns longer than fear.